Welcome to When We Die Talks. I'm your host, Zach Ansell. In this podcast, we explore different beliefs about what happens when we die and how those ideas shape the way we live. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. How was your first Christmas without your mom? How was your wedding day without your dad? If you know the pain of losing someone you deeply loved, Amori is for you. Amori is a digital life capsule that helps you reflect on mortality, navigate emotions, and create heartfelt messages for your children, so you can feel prepared and let your presence be felt through life's many moments, even when you're no longer here. Let your words become a source of strength and comfort for those who you leave behind. Tomorrow isn't promised, but your love can be. Download your mortality companion today at amori.life. That's AMORI.life, and use the code WhenWeDie50 for 50% off. Hey everyone, today's episode is a little different than past ones, and I know I've said that before, and I know I'll say it again, but it's a little different for a couple reasons that I'll get into in a minute. Ute Luppertz is a pet death doula, amongst other things, and has an amazing, compassionate approach to end-of-life care for the animals in our lives. She provides invaluable guidance during these deeply emotional moments. I'm not quite at that point, but when we recorded this episode, I just had a health scare with my 17-year-old dog, Jackson. That was the jumping off point of our conversation, and we get right into it. And I realize that we go straight into it, but I do pull back in the first couple minutes and have her explain more about who she is and what she does. Just want to give a little bit of a warning there so there's no confusion. You didn't miss out on anything. We just got right into it. But this was an amazing opportunity for me because I had these real-time questions and recent experiences that I was able to pull into the conversation. Some of that involves Ute sharing how she helps pet owners navigate loss, how to create meaningful rituals to honor our furry companions, and reframe the way we understand grief. Her insights remind me just how much our pets teach us about patience, compassion, and accepting life's inevitable changes. Whether you've experienced the loss of a pet, are currently navigating it, or simply cherish your animals, I believe you'll find Ute's perspective comforting and inspiring. And one last little thing before we get into it, I'm thinking about doing something a little bit different, yes, I said it again, for the next episode, and looking to do an anonymous call in the next couple days. So if you're listening the day of the release, April 16th, and you're interested, find the link in the show notes and apply. I'm curious if this could be an interesting way to get more community involvement, and hopefully if there's enough interest and it goes well, it becomes a regular part of the podcast. But enough of that. Let's get into today's episode. I hope you enjoy. I think this is going to be a really fun conversation. And actually, this is very timely because my 17-year-old dog, Jackson, had a seizure last week. I thought I was watching him die. It was very scary. It went on for like 5 or 6 minutes.
Wow.
And I was just like in full on panic mode. He's foaming at the mouth.
Yeah.
And not that like this was the first thing that I thought of, but it's, like do the ER stuff. He's on medication now. And then I was like, wow, this is kind of perfect timing to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely.
Because, I'm starting to transition into this phase of Jackson's not going to be here much longer. And I always kind of feel silly. This project was started out of me starting to think about my own mortality and what I wanted my life to look like. But there was a side part of it that was when I started, Jackson was 15. And I was like, that's getting up there and he's not going to be around here much longer. And
yeah,
I always feel silly mentioning that part as being a key to this project. But our pets are our lives for a lot of us. And something that I haven't brought up much, but this is such a great conversation for us to have because of the timing for me. And just because I know so many people love their pets and are going to be excited to hear your perspective on things.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's worse when we lose a pet because most of them die before us. Say if we have an elderly family member and they lived a long life, that is one thing. When you lose a human child, I cannot even fathom that. But most of our animals die before us and they are so pure. They don't have to do couples therapy with us. Some do, but others don't. But I think there is a power also. Now, say you go through massive life changes, which you alluded to prior to this.
Yeah.
Right. And then when we have like an existential questioning or an existential loneliness and something happens to our animals. Yeah. And even if we don't have that, we don't have to be down to feel that, but it's a powerful experience also to witness a death.
Yeah.
And to be present for that. That is a very powerful initiation.
Yeah. It was definitely a wake up call for me too, to some extent of like, I know that he's going to, like I said, 2 years ago. So now he's 17, but I knew he was going to pass, but I think there is still some complacency in that of like, well, it's going to happen in the future. It's going to happen in the future. And I've got this puppy that I've got to take care of. And I feel like there was so much of my energy that was going towards Walter, the 2-year-old, that I started to realize, wow, like this incident happened. And it was like, this reminds me that Jackson isn't going to be around much longer. And I need to appreciate this time I have with him.
And sometimes we have these events, such as what you experience, potentially they are markers. Yeah. Something happens where you go like, okay, that was not the history of what the kind of issues he had, and then I can distinctly say there were markers with a lot of my animals where I go like, okay, something happened out of the ordinary. And from then on, it was like the switch was flipped and then they started to dim their light.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's the case for Jackson.
Yeah.
But, also when you have such a big grand mal seizure, you could have there could be a lot of different reasons for that.
Yeah.
And seizures in and of themselves are really scary to watch.
Yeah. It was full on panic moment. But I feel like I've kind of gotten us in the deep end a little bit and I want to bring it back a little bit so people can understand a little bit more about who you are and what you do. And we talked before about how I have the normal questions that I ask, and we could very much have that conversation about you, but we thought that it would be maybe more powerful to bring your perspective on our pets and our animals and catering the questions towards that. And so we'll shift the questions today a little bit more towards our animals and our pets. But I think just right out of the gate, I think we should talk about you're a pet death doula, which I know death doula is becoming a more common term, but I still feel like people don't fully know what a death doula is, let alone a pet death doula.
Yeah.
And I know this is probably a question you answer a lot, but I definitely want the listeners to know a little bit more about you as a pet death doula and how you got into it. And then we can kind of dive into some of those bigger questions.
Yeah. So I got into it because of one of my dogs who had a very enlightened death experience here in my home. He was really sick, so there was nothing enlightened about that. And I was always fascinated about the metaphysical as a child even, and that wasn't around animals, right? So there is a whole story, and I've done a lot of meditative work in my life. And when you kind of go into certain spheres, you're a little bit closer to that which is not tangible. Right. And then when my dog crossed over, and I knew it would be a monumental event, I just sensed it in my gut. Right. Yeah. But when he passed away, I literally felt him going like, girlfriend, you got to do this work. All the other stuff, I've been doing therapeutic work for animals who have PTSD. I still do. I still love doing it. But what it was really powerful is I saw how people around me reacted. And I was in this sphere with him. Mind you, I have all the emotions that everybody else has. I'm not like above those. I'm
a human.
But I also understood it was a very profound initiation into something and to witness him. And it was a very dramatic decline for him. He went down like really hard in the last 10 days of his life. And he was also in the ER. And I just said, we got to get you home. I don't want you to die there. We got to get you home. And that's what we did. And I wanted the other animals to be around and do what they wanted to do. Right. And that is when it became really apparent to me that when we have animals, we take care of them. We're in charge basically because they are in civilized circumstances. They're not wildlife. Right. But the journey towards the death of an animal can be exhausting. Like you take care, you have to wipe up after them, as we talked about earlier, right? And then there are all these collective programmings that we have. It is our decision. We have to make the call on an external level. That is true. And I say, no, we can actually do it as a team. They're not little humans. We're not projecting our human thoughts, but we can do it as a team, right? And because I'm also an intuitive healer, as in I do animal communication, I designed a session and then also workshop programs where I combine tuning in with the animal and translating what they are feeling. And it's also sometimes really discomfort because most animals don't show discomfort. You and I, we can complain to each other. You don't go like,
Yeah, they're
oh.
very good at hiding discomfort.
Yeah, it's a template. That's how you survive in the wild. You don't complain to your friends or say like, I've had a bad day, go to 7-Eleven, get me a bottle of booze or something, you know? And so I just felt like I can share what I perceive from the animal's inner landscape. I can also support you as a human saying, okay, what are you doing? How is your relationship with your vet? Have you asked questions because you might have been too stressed to ask those?
Yeah.
Right. And then how can we prepare this transition if we have the luxury of preparation? So when someone gets run over by a car, no prep, right? It's shock and grief. But when we have this impending transition, how can we create a space that isn't just the black hole, right? Where we can honor them, where I do then a little bit of shaman work, as in I walk with the animal through the death process. Most animals get euthanized, and then we talk about them and I talk to them while that's happening, right? Or I do it right before. And that is like a combination where I can hold space for the family or for the person, for the animal. And we also can continue to massage what might be their legacy. You know, and a legacy is a very big word. It sometimes is that we plant a tree, you know, or that we light a candle or whatnot. I will very soon, actually probably later today or tomorrow, publish like a short YouTube clip. A friend of mine interviewed me about the assignment that a cat gave her person. And when you hear this, it's so wild. I could never come up with it. The point being is that the cat lives on. There is something, not just to remember her, but there is a legacy that we can have. And that makes it very different, you know? And when you look at humans, in every culture, in every tribe, in every society, whether you're religious or not, it doesn't matter. We have containers for death and dying, you know? We have ceremonies of life. We go to church. We do the temple. We beat the drums. We do, you know, in every tribe you have this. We have nothing for animals. Nothing. And I'm like, I want to help facilitate change in that area. There's no reason to fall in a hole, and then everybody says, oh, at least he got Walter, or at least he got, you know, or get another cat. Like, please give me a break.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly beautiful. And that was one thing that like came up to me as I was kind of doing a little research before the interview and stuff, is you talked a lot about rituals and legacies. And that's not something that we really have for our pets. And I think when I watched some stuff of yours and that phrase kept coming up, the thing that I thought about is like, you know, the thing that I always hear about people doing is, hey, we've got to put our dog down on Friday. And so on Thursday, we fed him all his favorite foods and we did this. And it kind of feels like that's what I kind of hear just in general is like, oh yeah, this is what we did. And then we put him down. And it's like, and yeah, it definitely feels like you're creating this bigger container of, you know, it doesn't just need to be the last good day or, you know, this final hurrah, that we can extend that out on the front end and on the back end.
Correct.
It doesn't just need to be, hey, we did all these really fun things and then you're gone and now we're crying. And like you said, you know, I have Walter, or go get another pet, or it's immediately move on to something else. And at least I know for a lot of my friends, our pets are our kids.
Yeah.
And so it's like, can you imagine telling that to a parent who lost a child?
Exactly.
And I don't want to equate those two in any way or anything, but it is, you know, these are strong feelings and people are basically just being told, hey, you know, like throw them like a little party the day before and then they're gone, and cry a little bit and then just go get another dog and it'll all be okay.
Yeah. And you know, for some people, it is appropriate to get another pet right away. I'm not saying you shouldn't. It's not my call to say anything. I want to say the word ritual sounds maybe a little bit holy, you know, and ritual can be anything. It can be anything. One of my dogs was very popular at the vet office and he passed away several years ago. And at the time, I had an animal hospice support group in my home, and the veterinarian who euthanized him actually was in that group also because she had lost one of her dogs, so we were all, it was really awesome.
Yeah.
And my dog was not, he was a very robust, sturdy little dude, and there wasn't anything, whoa, ritual, this or that. And you know what I did? A few weeks later, I invited the entire vet clinic. I invited everybody. We had the best party ever.
Oh, that's awesome.
I had never had more people at my house, not for any of my birthdays. The best food, and we had a blast. It was joyful. That is one example. That was the ritual for Toddy, my dog Toddy. And other things are very different. They can be quiet, they can be somber, and, it doesn't matter, but it can be anything as long as we can honor our love.
I was going to say, you're honoring their existence, and it's the same that we do with other people.
Yeah, I'm still jealous. Nobody has a party for me like this. I'm not kidding.
I mean, for me as a huge introvert, I'm like, I don't know if I would really want a big party, but I could see throwing a big party for Jackson. Like, that would be fun. Although he's kind of an introvert too.
I wasn't planning on it. I just thought, who are the people that supported us the most?
Yeah.
The receptionist. One of the receptionists was the last person to see him alive. He carried Toddy to my car because he couldn't walk anymore. And I'm like, and all of the vet techs. And the clinic is close to my house. I said, whoever wants to come. And they were like, really? I'm like, yeah, just bring food.
Yeah.
We were all lucky that it could be after hours and they just went by and it was like, this is cool. And my other animals were like, yeah, we have a really cool household here,
They're like, we have something to look forward to down the road.
Yeah. It is very personal. I'm an introvert too, believe it or not. This is not my thing to throw a big party. It just so happened. There would have been a hospice meeting that night. I thought, okay, let's just see who wants to come. Right. Yeah. And sometimes it's very different. You might need someone to bring you food for all I know. Or, we all have different preferences. And sometimes, after someone dies, or especially, I think with animals, because it's more structured as in euthanasia, I call it the gray zone afterwards, where people initially are really with you and then everybody goes on with their life and you go like, my house is so eerily quiet.
Yeah.
Right. And that is the time where it's very fertile for us, fertile ground for us to get support also.
I definitely heard that in other conversations and more towards like the loss of like family members or whatever, or just like you just got a medical procedure or whatever. But there's this time where it's like everybody's wanting to help like right out of the gate. The problem is that's almost like when you're at your best in this bad situation because you have all this adrenaline, and it's like when you come out of that is almost when everybody like goes away and it's like, oh yeah, everything's fine. They're doing good now. And it's like, well, hold on. Like I had kind of this adrenaline rush and I had all these things kind of pushing me through. That's all gone. And now I feel empty and alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is scary.
It is. It very much is. Yes.
Yeah.
Very much is. And that's where I don't want to fill that space, but how can we navigate that? And with animals, there is an additional twist to it because 99%, I didn't do the math, but most companion animals do get euthanized. And not only that kind of where it's suddenly like lonely or empty or whatever it is for you.
Yeah.
But a lot of people also feel guilty because it was a scheduled death. And that is when
it was a decision.
We go down a rabbit hole. And then people say, oh, it was for the best. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not a feeling that I'm experiencing.
Yeah, totally. Well, yeah. And that's all a lot of conversations around death is it's like, there's these platitudes that were like, I guess this is what I'm supposed to say, but it's like, yeah, that's not really helping. It makes it harder.
People don't know. I mean, they want to fix us, right?
Yeah.
And for me, grief is nothing that needs to be fixed. It's not a disease. When you go to spaces where you get really into dark darkness where you self-harm or anything like that, that's different. That's something where you might want to employ some structured support, right?
Yeah.
Grieving, it doesn't matter how long, really. The more you love, the more you grieve. And it is just part of that. It's just part of that heart connection that we have with another living creature,
Yeah, it's part of the experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is kind of the big question of the podcast. And we talked about this, and I tried to switch it up a little bit. What do you think happens to our pets when we die? And I think even when we kind of brought this up last time, and I'm probably not going to quote you exactly, but I think you said something along the lines of, it's not what I believe, it's what I know from experience.
Yeah. So
I thought that was a beautiful statement in itself.
Yeah. And when I say that, that doesn't mean I want to sell that to you as something you should believe when I say what I know. I can say what I know is that, now this sounds very corny, but what I know is they're not gone. The body is, and it's a tough adjustment. I'm not going to lie. Do I miss my bodies that used to hang around here? Yeah, I do. The core connection that I have with who they were is never gone. I have that same core connection with my father who died a few years ago. So it's a human, right?
Yeah.
And it's that. So, and that doesn't mean that I think everybody is the same, just over the rainbow bridge or whatever we call it. It's a beautiful metaphor, but I also think it's overused. So what I know to be true is that I've had so many animals because I take in older animals. So we had quite a few.
Which is an amazing thing to do.
Yeah.
Very incredible thing to do. Because it's not easy.
No, but it's very gratifying. I mean, honestly, I think puppies might be more work than a middle-aged dog. So just saying.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right? Kittens is a different thing, but then they have to make sure the curtains don't fall down and all the things, So, and I've had some very profound experiences when I watched them take their last breath. I was there. Right. And it wasn't, some died naturally because they were like, no, I don't want a vet around. And they made sure they exited before the vet even came to my house. And there was a shift in the air, literally. Were they suddenly non-existent? No. I can call in the energy. I mean, some of my animals, they died 20 years ago or so, a long time in terms of linear time. And what I know to be true is that connection, that also transcends who I am as a person. That is always there. It's never gone.
Yeah.
It's sometimes because after 20 years, I don't think about Shiva, my famous dog. I don't think about him every day. When I talk about these workshops, he's always there because he's like the one who initiated me into this, so to speak. Yeah. Right? And I'm very cautious right now to label this. I like the word soul. Other people use the word spirit. I don't think we have to label anything. I just know it's harder to connect with someone or something that you can't see, touch, or feel, and sometimes you think you make it all up, and maybe some things we do make up. I don't know. The connection, and, people don't see this, but I keep touching my chest here. The connection to me is uninterrupted. And there's a very famous quote from Tuesdays with Morrie where they say, death ends a life, not a relationship. I paraphrase here. And for me, that's not a spiritual book. That's the book about an old man that dies and who has a younger friend, right? Yeah. Death ends a life, not a relationship. And that is so totally true for me. And not that I believe it. I don't want to kind of go like, where are you? It's none of that. Yeah. I have flair for the drama, but
it's okay.
But it's really true. I feel their presence anytime. I'm available. Anytime. And some are a little bit more removed. Others are closer. I also don't cling to that. I just, I could not do this work. I could not do hospice support or death doulaing if this was the end of it all. I would be very, very depressed. And
that'd be hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And it isn't hard. It is just, how can we also connect on these other levels if people want to? It's not for everyone. It's, and for me, knowing that and feeling it, it's quite tangible, is amazing, is amazing.
Yeah.
The other night I dreamt of one of my dogs, and then I thought, oh, cool. And then I remembered, oh yeah, her anniversary is coming up actually next week, right? Her death anniversary. And she was the second most recent death here in my house. And then I thought, oh, Mila said hi, and then I thought, oh yeah, this was actually in March, and I have the dates, but I didn't do it because I was busy. Right. And it was just so sweet. It was just so sweet. And, and I will probably put something on social media and la, la, la. And I wrote the circumstances of her death were very intense, very, very intense. It was very on the surface unexpected, and I dealt with a lot of distractions around me where I had to manage my friends, actually, to some extent. And that was the last thing I wanted to do, but everybody was, flabbergasted and tried to do things. And everybody was a little bit triggered because we were all in shock. Right.
Yeah.
And she's with me, she just is.
Yeah.
That's all
I love that. I love knowing that. I haven't experienced a ton of loss. I've lost pets, but it was when I was much younger. And so it's like, I don't know. Jackson is really kind of, I got him in college. I basically had him my whole adult life. Like, he's my dog. Yeah. And I've known for a very long time, kind of like you talked about earlier. It's like, I've always known that the day he goes, it's going to gut me. I've always known it's going to be very hard. I mean, some of the hardest times of my life when I didn't really think I had anybody else, even though I know, like, if I said this, I know people be like, oh, you had me, but there is definitely some times where I didn't think I had anybody else in my life, but I had Jackson, and we would run out to the coast and just like get away or whatever. And so I've always known that it's going to be very hard, but I love knowing or believing that he'll always be there in a way.
And talk to him about it.
Yeah.
And say, dude, we got to come to a new arrangement when you are done with your body,
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that because it's easy. I absolutely feel that from you, because he raised you. He made you the man that you are. And that's pretty spectacular if you ask me,
Yeah. Yeah. That actually leads almost perfectly into what things can we be doing, towards the end of our pets' lives to show them that we love them. And I definitely don't want you to give away all the secret sauce of like, the work that you do. But, what are things? I mean, and I'll say another thing that came up in my research of you that I really loved is you talked about meditating. I will say meditation's a huge part of my life. It has been. It's actually part of this project in a sense of like the way I got into meditation was death contemplation. And I've basically had a very strong, meditation practice over the past 2 years, but Walter will regularly come and sit with me. Mm-hmm. And usually like Jackson, I'm like, I'm not going to disturb you. You're comfortable on the couch and it's, upstairs or whatever. But after I saw your video talking about it, I was like, I'm just going to set up like a little spot in the meditation room. I'm going to bring your favorite blanket up when I come up and I'm going to set you in there. And I will say maybe about 25 to 50% of the time he stays. Other times he's like, I'm just going to go get in bed. But it is kind of nice that it's become this like little familial thing where it's, like I'll be meditating, Walter's not usually in my lap, but like kind of right at my legs. And then I have a bed right in front of that Jackson's in. And it's, I just imagine that we're all kind of being present with each other and kind of our energies are exchanging. So that's one thing that I've taken from you. But yeah, what are some other things that we can be doing to make sure they know that we love them?
Yeah.
Besides food. Jackson would just say, give me more food.
This is actually a really good example that Jackson then went back to his own bed. And I want to say there are so many things, and it is very specific to your circumstances. But say in your case, when you meditate, imagine that Jackson meditates on his bed because, when we get older and frail, we sometimes detach a little bit more from, some people say, oh, they don't love me anymore. They don't want to snuggle. And I'm like, what would you do when your body is deteriorating?
I'm already detaching at 37. So I can only imagine what I'm going to be like at, 75 or 80, whatever his calculation is.
Right. So one thing I want to say is don't take it personally. And this is for everybody, Don't take it personally when they're less engaged with you. It's not that they love you less. Some become harder of hearing and seeing, Hearing certainly is very common, and it's not a disease. It's just they don't hear you. But also, they retreat a little bit more. And when you watch dying people, they do that too, right? So that is one thing. And I would say the bigger label would be, can you accept where they are? I have to remind myself of that too. I have a super senior here. He is not checking out, but he is in a very high maintenance stage for me. So he is on a slew of herbal tinctures and also medications. And then depending on the time of day, he is getting more restless because of the medications that he's on. And sometimes I'm like, I'm not that patient because I want to do something. And and then to rein myself back in and just remember when he starts wandering around, he can't help it. They cannot tell us I'm feeling restless or I need this or I need that. So accepting where they are, that is again a very lofty concept, but really check yourself and see where do you get irritated and why, and sometimes we also don't get a lot of rest when the nights are often worse.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's where I say, what do you need? What do you need to be a good caretaker? And it might be, and I'm giving some random examples here. I had to do this at one time in my life where both of my dogs were going down. They were a married couple and they kind of had this thing with each other. And it was very beautiful, even though a lot of people didn't understand, they died within a few days of each other. Leading up to that, I had to carry two big dogs around who couldn't walk, and I didn't look all that good, And that is when I arranged for some time outs for me. Officially we would call it pet sitting, but I had people here and I took an afternoon off and took a sauna or got a massage or, went for a walk where I didn't have to look like, are you okay? Do I need to pick you up? When we are in high octane caretaker mode, it is easy to forget. People say, I'm too busy. I have to do this. I have to do that. And I say, you will never not be busy. Never.
Yeah.
There's
always going to be something.
Yeah, exactly. And then how can you make sure that you get some basic nutrition and rest? Who do you need to recruit to be your allies? If you have a partner, great. If you don't have a partner, you have to organize it a little differently.
Yeah.
Right. And then
you have support. Like, I think just in general, you have more support than you think you do. You just need to ask.
Yes. And allow yourself to get support also.
Yeah. Yes, very much.
Many people have children. How can you work with your kids? And children are much more brilliant than we give them credit for because they are not as contaminated intellectually as we are as adults. I've got a lot of families with kids where we recruited the children as helpers for their dog or for their cat. We coached them, but we also really recruited them as helpers, which is amazing. Also,
so many levels.
What?
On so many levels of just being part of that, awareness of death and hardships in life. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah. And then also if you have other animals, they feel things too. You might suddenly see different behaviors and go like, Fluffy didn't do that. Or my cat is hissing more. And I'm like, how can they express the shift in energy, you know? So you might see that also, right? And then on a very pragmatic level, in the best of all worlds, say in your situation, if I may take that as an example.
Yeah.
If if you were to ask me directly, I would say, Zach, get all of the information you might need suddenly at the very end. Get it now. Put it in a Google file. Call euthanasia services that are available 24/7. Talk to your vet. Not to be morbid. You don't want to have to deal with that if you have
be prepared.
Yeah. And then you have it on your fridge or in a Google file, and you kind of dial the numbers on blindly when it comes to that. So in the best of all worlds, you think about some things way before it gets super intense. That is the ideal scenario. And not everybody anticipates that, or sometimes there is an illness and we don't know it's there and it pops very suddenly and we go like, holy moly, right? So there are many, many, many things we can do. And then the people that you have in your life, including professionals, I sometimes refer people to other healing practitioners that have skills that might be suitable for the animal, right?
Yeah.
Are these people that you trust? Can you actually have a conversation with your vet that isn't just objectifying in an unconscious way of the animal? And so I think there is much to be said about looking at it. And also, I had quote unquote conversations with my animals, and say one of my dogs, he really didn't want to be cremated. He was the biggest boy in my house. And he died on a very bone dry day, in the late summer, meaning there was no way I could have dug a hole 75-pound dog. And that was
taken quite some time.
Even with the help of some burly men in my life, we said, look, this is, and then keeping it deep enough so that I said, Jonah, I cannot do it. I know you are a backyard boy. He wanted to be outdoors all the time. And I'm like, I cannot do it. But I had that quote unquote conversation with him. And I said, I will cremate you. There are things we can do. It's called witness cremation, where you can be present. And back in the day, I could actually do all of the deeds under their supervision, which is something that I have chosen to do with my animals when I cremate and they, don't go into a grave. So those are all things. What do you want to do? What do you envision doing? What feels good? And you might not know all of this, but allow yourself to fantasize a little bit, to imagine what would feel good to you. And then you can present it to your dog and say, hey, I was thinking about this or that. And you will feel something, And in the best of all worlds, you think about it early on if you know. And if you don't know, you do the best you can. And then look around. Who would be a good role model for you? Who has modeled some things where you go like, oh, this is really cool. When I hear myself talk right now, underneath of that is giving ourselves permission to allow the magnitude and the profoundness of our relationship with our animals. And not just saying, yeah, even the term putting them down. I'm really offended by that. I don't put anyone down. They die, either naturally or with assistance.
There's this like common thread that I've kind of, and I'm going to try to like thread it through. But you said something earlier about, Jackson kind of helped raise me. And you talked about there's this whole act of patience with older dogs, and then prepping, a Google document of these things. What incredible teachers our pets can be for us because I think that's a lot of stuff too that like, hey, you know what? Probably better just in general if I'm patient with everybody, not just Jackson, but everybody in my life. Walter, my mom, my dad, someone who's frustrating me, like at work or whatever, like be more patient. Hey, what else is probably a good idea? To start thinking about, and, my dad and I talk a lot about death, and, he definitely has a very regimented, this is, he has it all done, but it's like, hey, maybe start talking to family members about what you want to have happen when you die. Like there's all this stuff that I'm hearing from you that it's like very, practical and for our pets, but it's also, hey, this is also really important stuff that we should be doing in our own lives for ourselves and for others. And so what a great teacher that we have in our houses. And I think we take that for granted a lot of times because, that's just this unconditional love. There's so much more there too.
Yes, I totally agree. I also want to say, I don't know about you, but I'm no saint. I'm not always patient, right?
No.
And
even with all the meditation, I try.
And for me, it's helpful to just also say I'm human and to catch myself with self-compassion.
Yeah.
And then I can snap out of it.
Yeah.
Right. And say, okay, I had a moment. And sometimes I know from myself, speaking from myself, I'm less patient when I'm tired. And some hospice is tiring. I don't get a lot of, and then to say, okay, I'm just human and trying to live up to my values as in, I don't want to just blindly lash out when I'm not patient or when don't have it together. That, but that's what it's regardless of circumstance to look at that.
I think there's this one thing that I've been trying to tell myself a lot is I'm doing my best. Mm-hmm. And it is that just self-compassion of, hey, you know what? Like last week, or I guess it was the week leading up to Jackson's seizure, Walter peed the bed twice, 2 nights in a row. And it was just like, okay, now I'm up at 3 a.m. And for me, it's like, if I have to I'm stripping the bed, I'm doing all this stuff. It's like, at that point, I'm up. It's 3 a.m. and it's like, I'm not really getting back to bed for a couple hours. So I'm going to sit and read or do these things. And it's like, this is not fun, but
it's not.
I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best today because I didn't get sleep and, I might be a little bit more irritated and sorry everybody, or whoever I had to interact with. Hopefully I was still kind and not too difficult. But it's like I just choose to believe that we're all doing our best and we all have a lot of stuff that's going on that we don't know about each other. And I'd rather look at it that way. And so I'm so glad that we have our pets to help us with that too.
Yes. Many of them are much more forgiving than our human friends.
That is so very true. Well, I just want to thank you so very much for taking the time to do this call. I think it took a little bit with just some of my life circumstances to get this scheduled, and you were so patient with me. But I think, and again, not to get, too, when you said ritual or too woo-woo or anything, but I think this kind of happened exactly when it was meant to happen because we were able to have a deeper conversation because of what happened with Jackson last week.
I thought about that, about how perfect.
And so I'm not thankful that happened to him and that I had to go through that or we had to go through that, but it's great that was something then we could talk about. And so I think this all worked out the best way that it could.
I totally agree.
But so I just thank you so much for taking the time. And do you want to let people know? I know you have a website and Instagram and stuff, but I know you also have an upcoming training too. So maybe you can kind of talk about that for a second and just let people know how to find you.
All right. So here we go, people. Very simple, easy to find me is via my website, and it's Pet's Point of View with -- pets -point -of-view.com. I have to always remember, right?
I'll definitely put it in the show notes too, so it's easily clickable and stuff.
Exactly. So you can find me, and if you want to learn more, you can do a free discovery session and talk to me, right? I'm also on Instagram at Pet's Point of View, and I'm on Facebook and all of the good places. And then one of the bigger projects, so I do a lot of one-on-one work with people, obviously. And then one of the bigger projects is pet hospice and death doula training. And that is from June 19th to June 22nd. And that is a very powerful and beautiful and intimate workshop. So if you're curious about that, reach out. Link is on my website. And if you go to my socials, I have a link tree where you can click on the workshop and find out more. And no, it's not just for professionals. It's also for people like you and I. I really want to shift the paradigm around death and dying of animals and give people tools and more awareness. And you're warmly welcome to check it out. And again, have a conversation with me if you want to. I'd be happy to talk to you.
I think you're doing amazing work, and I think you're definitely on your way to changing how we approach it. So yeah, thank you again so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Awesome. It was so awesome that you had me here.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of When We Die Talks. I hope today's conversation sparked some thoughts and helped you feel a little more at ease with the idea of death. Remember, this journey is all about exploring our beliefs and fears together, so I'd love to hear from you. Call our voicemail at 971-328-0864 and share what you think happens when we die. Your thoughts might just be featured on a future episode and could help others on their own journey. Until next time, have a good life.